Berikirte darler bagien hook sesui format yarng anderminter. The moment Jimin collapsed in front of Jungkook, the entire room seemed to lose its breath. Tears streamed down his face with a pain so deep that even those who thought they understood him stood frozen in silence. Jungkook remained motionless, unable to decide whether to reach out or step away, while Taehyung watched from the corner with an expression no one could read. Hidden beneath that quiet gaze was a truth capable of destroying years of trust and changing every relationship forever. But what did Taehyung know that no one else had discovered? And why would that single secret leave everyone in tears? For as long as anyone could remember, Jimin and Jungkook had shared a bond that seemed impossible to break. It was never built on loud promises or dramatic displays of loyalty, but on countless quiet moments that only the people closest to them could truly understand. Every exhausting rehearsal, every sleepless night, every overwhelming expectation became lighter whenever they stood beside each other. Even without speaking, they had learned to recognize the smallest changes in each other's expressions, as though years of shared experiences had created an invisible language that no one else could hear. To those around them, their connection felt unshakable, a rare kind of trust that had survived pressure, success, criticism, and endless sacrifices. RM often admired the invisible distance between Jimin and Jungkook continued to grow in ways that no one could explain. It never appeared through loud arguments or obvious conflict, but through the quiet absence of the warmth that had once come so naturally between them. Every shared glance carried hesitation, every moment together seemed shorter than before, and every opportunity to speak honestly slipped away beneath carefully crafted smiles. The others sensed the change, yet each believed it was only temporary exhaustion brought on by demanding schedules and endless responsibilities. RM encouraged everyone to take care of themselves. Jin quietly prepared comforting meals hoping to restore a sense of normalcy. Sugar observed everything without forcing conversations, and J-Hope tried filling every room with laughter that could no longer hide the growing tension. Only Taehyung remained unusually silent, his thoughtful eyes following every interaction with increasing concern as pieces of a hidden puzzle slowly came together inside his mind. Jimin, meanwhile, carried a burden that became heavier each passing day. The secret he had chosen to protect was never meant to create distance, yet every sacrifice made in silence only widened the gap separating him from the person he trusted most. He convinced himself that enduring the pain alone was the only way to prevent greater heartbreak, believing that temporary loneliness was a small price to pay if it meant shielding Jungkook from an unbearable truth. What he failed to realize was that silence often creates wounds far deeper than honesty ever could. Jungkook interpreted every unanswered question as another sign that something precious was slipping away. The confidence that had always defined their relationship slowly gave way to uncertainty, and uncertainty quietly transformed into self-doubt. He replayed countless memories in his mind, searching for the exact moment everything had begun to change, wondering if he had unknowingly caused Jimin's growing distance. The more he searched for answers, the more impossible they became to find. Even the smallest misunderstandings began to feel like undeniable proof that the bond they had spent years building was quietly falling apart. Then an unexpected event changed everything. Late one evening, while everyone believed the day had finally come to an end, Jungkook accidentally witnessed Jimin leaving alone with an envelope clutched tightly against his chest. His expression carried a sorrow so overwhelming that it barely resembled the calm composure he had shown only minutes earlier. Curiosity mixed with fear pushed Jungkook to follow from a distance, never intending to invade Jimin's privacy but unable to ignore the overwhelming feeling that something irreversible was about to happen. Hidden beneath the dim lights of a quiet street, Jimin stopped before meeting. From that night forward, nothing felt the same. Jungkook carried the memory of the mysterious exchange like a wound that refused to heal, and every attempt to convince himself there had to be another explanation collapsed beneath the weight of what his own eyes had witnessed. He no longer trusted the comforting excuses that once came so easily whenever Jimin seemed distant. Instead, every small detail became another piece of evidence supporting a painful story that existed only inside his mind. Jimin noticed the change immediately. The quiet reassurance that had always lived in Jungkook's eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded hesitation that hurt far more than anger ever could. Yet instead of asking for an explanation, Jimin accepted the distance as another consequence of the choice he had already made. He believed that if carrying the misunderstanding alone could protect everyone else from a far greater tragedy, then enduring Jungkook's silent disappointment was a sacrifice he had to accept. Day after day, he buried his own heartbreak beneath determined smiles, never realizing how deeply that silence was damaging the person he wanted to protect the most. Around them, the atmosphere became increasingly fragile. RM sensed that the emotional balance holding everyone together was beginning to fracture, though he could not identify its source. Jin watched Jimin lose his appetite and quietly worried without pressing for answers. Sugar noticed Jungkook spending longer hours alone, staring into empty spaces as though searching for memories that no longer made sense. J-Hope tried to brighten the mood with endless optimism, but even his warmth struggled against the invisible weight settling over the group. Taehyung carried the heaviest burden of all. Every passing day confirmed what he had feared from the beginning. He knew enough to understand that Jimin's actions were driven by selfless sacrifice rather than betrayal, yet revealing even a fragment of the truth too early could destroy promises that had been made under painful circumstances. Trapped between loyalty and responsibility, he remained silent while watching two people he deeply cared about drift closer to emotional collapse. Then another unexpected twist pushed everything closer to the edge. One quiet afternoon, a small package arrived without a sender's name. It was delivered to the shared space where everyone gathered, and before anyone could question it, Jungkook found himself opening it almost instinctively. Inside lay a collection of photographs and documents carefully arranged to tell a devastating story. The images showed Jimin meeting the same mysterious stranger on several different occasions, each photograph captured from angles that made every encounter appear secretive and suspicious. The accompanying papers seemed to suggest hidden financial transactions and private agreements that no one else knew about. There was no explanation, no context, only carefully selected fragments designed to create doubt. The room fell into complete silence as every page revealed another layer of apparent deception. Jungkook felt the ground disappear beneath him. The uncertainty he had been fighting suddenly transformed into overwhelming certainty, and that certainty pierced his heart with unbearable force. Even RM, Jin, Sugar, and J-Hope struggled to understand what they were seeing, unable to reconcile the evidence before them with the Jimin they had always known. Only Taehyung's expression changed in a different way. Rather than shock, his face reflected quiet alarm, as though he immediately recognized that someone had deliberately constructed an illusion. Before he could explain, Jimin entered the room. His eyes stopped on the scattered photographs, and for the first time since everything had begun, the calm mask he had worn for so long completely shattered. Fear, sorrow, guilt, and desperation flooded across his face all at once. He understood instantly that the secret he had fought so hard to protect was no longer safely hidden. But even worse, he realized that every piece of evidence had been arranged to hide the one truth capable of explaining everything. As Jungkook slowly lifted his eyes toward Jimin, they were filled not with anger but with heartbreaking disappointment. That single look carried more pain than words ever could, and in that unbearable silence, Jimin realized that the moment he had feared more than anything had finally arrived. Yet the greatest revelation was still waiting in the shadows, and Taehyung knew that once it emerged, none of their lives would ever be the same again. The silence that followed was heavier than any confrontation could have been. No one reached for the scattered photographs, no one questioned the anonymous documents, and no one dared to interrupt the painful distance that had suddenly divided the room. Jimin stood frozen, his trembling hands hanging helplessly at his sides as he realized that every sacrifice he had made in secret had been transformed into evidence against him. The disappointment reflected in Jungkook's eyes was not filled with hatred, but with something even more devastating. It was the quiet grief of someone who desperately wanted to believe, yet no longer knew what to hold on to. That single expression pierced Jimin more deeply than any accusation ever could. He lowered his head, unable to defend himself without destroying a promise that had never belonged to him alone. The burden he had carried for so long had finally reached the point where even breathing felt difficult, but breaking his silence too soon would place another innocent person in unimaginable danger. Unknown to everyone else, the mysterious meetings, the envelopes, and the carefully hidden transactions had never been about betrayal. They were connected to a desperate effort to protect someone whose future depended entirely on Jimin's willingness to endure misunderstanding. The anonymous package had not appeared by coincidence. Someone had been watching every movement, patiently collecting fragments of the truth while removing every detail that would reveal Jimin's real purpose. It was a carefully planned trap designed to isolate him from the people who trusted him most. Taehyung understood that almost immediately. His thoughts raced back to the moment he had first discovered irregularities surrounding the mysterious stranger, the strange requests for secrecy, and the warning that exposing the truth too early could ruin everything. What he had dismissed as an isolated problem now revealed itself as part of something much larger and far more dangerous. He realized that the enemy had never intended to steal money or create rumors alone. The true objective was to destroy trust, because once trust collapsed, every relationship built upon it would fall without resistance. RM slowly gathered the scattered papers, studying each page with growing suspicion. The documents looked convincing, yet something about their timing felt strangely deliberate. Jin noticed details that seemed almost too perfectly arranged, as though every image had been chosen to provoke maximum emotional damage rather than reveal objective facts. Sugar quietly observed the inconsistencies hidden between the photographs, recognizing that genuine secrets rarely unfolded with such convenient precision. J-Hope, despite his own confusion, could not accept that the compassionate person he had known for years would suddenly become someone completely different overnight. Doubt began replacing certainty, but for Jungkook, the emotional wound was already too deep to heal through logic alone. His heart remained trapped between love and disbelief, unable to decide which one deserved his trust. Jimin sensed that internal battle without hearing a single word. Every instinct urged him to finally reveal everything, to expose the hidden truth regardless of the consequences, but the promise he had sworn to protect echoed relentlessly inside his mind. If he spoke now, years of sacrifice made by others would become meaningless. If he remained silent, he would lose the one person whose faith had always given him strength. The impossible choice threatened to break what remained of his spirit. Then, just as despair seemed ready to consume everything, Taehyung quietly stepped forward. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a determination that none of the others had seen before. He had reached the point where silence could no longer protect anyone. The hidden truth had already caused enough suffering, and waiting any longer would only guarantee irreversible regret. As every pair of eyes slowly turned toward him, the room filled with a tense anticipation unlike anything they had ever experienced. Taehyung drew a slow breath, knowing that the next few moments would expose a reality none of them had imagined. Once the truth left his lips, every misunderstanding, every sacrifice, every tear, and every painful decision would finally connect into one heartbreaking story that would change all of their lives forever. Taehyung's quiet determination altered the atmosphere before a single explanation had even begun. His normally gentle composure now carried the weight of someone who had spent far too long protecting a truth that was never his to reveal. Every heartbeat inside the room seemed louder than the last as everyone waited for the silence to finally break. Jimin closed his eyes, already understanding what Taehyung had decided to do. The promise that had chained him to endless loneliness was about to disappear, but instead of relief, an overwhelming sense of guilt spread through him. He had wanted to protect everyone from pain, yet his silence had only multiplied it. Jungkook remained motionless, his emotions tangled between hope and fear. Part of him desperately wished Taehyung would expose a misunderstanding so simple that everything could return to normal. Another part feared that the truth would be even more devastating than the betrayal he had imagined. As Taehyung slowly began revealing the hidden pieces that had been missing from every assumption, the carefully constructed illusion started to collapse. The mysterious envelopes had never contained secret agreements for personal gain. They carried legal documents connected to a private financial arrangement created months earlier, after someone close to the group had quietly fallen into a crisis that could have destroyed an innocent family's future. Jimin had discovered the situation by accident and immediately chose to help, insisting that his own involvement remain completely anonymous. He had invested his savings, accepted exhausting additional responsibilities, and secretly sacrificed opportunities that would have benefited only himself, all to ensure that no one else would have to carry the burden or live with public humiliation. The mysterious stranger was not an accomplice but a legal representative bound by strict confidentiality, unable to reveal the full circumstances without violating promises made to protect those involved. Every meeting had been arranged in private solely because exposure would have placed vulnerable people under unbearable public scrutiny. Taehyung had learned fragments of this reality after accidentally uncovering confidential records, and when he confronted Jimin in private weeks earlier, he had been asked to keep silent until the crisis had safely passed. Believing he was protecting both Jimin and the innocent people connected to the situation, Taehyung had reluctantly agreed. Neither of them imagined that someone else had been secretly watching, capturing carefully edited photographs, removing every innocent detail, and turning compassion into apparent betrayal. As each missing piece finally fell into place, the room became unbearably quiet. RM lowered his head as regret settled across his face. Jin's eyes filled with tears, realizing how much suffering Jimin had endured without asking anyone for sympathy. Sugar slowly closed the anonymous folder, understanding that every page had been designed to manipulate emotions rather than reveal facts. J-Hope covered his mouth, overwhelmed by the realization that his cheerful attempts to lift everyone's spirits had been taking place while Jimin silently carried a burden too heavy for one person alone. But no one was affected more deeply than Jungkook. Every painful assumption he had accepted as truth now returned like waves of crushing guilt. The cold distance he had created, the silent disappointment reflected in his eyes, and the trust he had allowed fear to weaken replayed inside his mind with unbearable clarity. He finally understood that Jimin had never stepped away because trust had disappeared. He had stepped into loneliness because his love and loyalty was stronger than his desire to be understood. At that realization, Jimin's strength finally gave way. The walls he had built around his emotions collapsed all at once, and the tears he had fought to hide for so long could no longer be contained. Overwhelmed by exhaustion, relief, heartbreak, and regret, he broke down in front of Jungkook, unable to carry another second of silent suffering. The sight froze everyone in place. Jungkook felt his own heart shatter as he realized that the person he had wanted to protect had been standing alone through every painful moment because of a sacrifice no one had ever seen. Yet even as the truth finally emerged, another question remained unanswered. Who had orchestrated the deception, and why had someone gone to such extraordinary lengths to destroy the bond that had survived everything else? That final mystery still lingered in the shadows, reminding them that although the truth had been revealed, the consequences of the deception were only beginning to unfold. Jimin's tears refused to stop. They flowed with the force of months of buried exhaustion, silent loneliness, and unbearable responsibility, washing away every carefully controlled emotion he had hidden behind gentle smiles. The room remained completely still, as though time itself had paused to witness the heartbreaking release of someone who had carried far more than anyone had ever realized. Jungkook could no longer ignore the overwhelming weight pressing against his own heart. Every memory of the recent weeks returned with painful clarity. Every moment he had doubted Jimin, every silent glance filled with disappointment, every opportunity to reach out that he had allowed to slip away became another source of regret that tightened around his chest. For the first time, he understood that trust was never destroyed by lies alone. It could also be broken by fear, assumptions, and the painful decision to believe appearances before believing the person who had stood beside him through countless storms. Taehyung quietly stepped back, allowing the truth to settle naturally inside the hearts of everyone present. He had never wanted to become the one who revealed Jimin's sacrifice, but watching the misunderstanding consume two people who cared so deeply for one another had become unbearable. His silence had begun with good intentions, yet he now realized that even the noblest intentions could cause unimaginable pain when the truth remained hidden for too long. RM slowly reflected on how easily even the strongest relationships could be shaken when trust was replaced by unanswered questions. Jin gently gathered the scattered photographs and anonymous documents before tearing them apart one by one, refusing to let carefully manufactured deception continue poisoning the room. Sugar examined every detail once more, recognizing how skillfully the evidence had been manipulated to exploit emotion instead of reason. J-Hope, his eyes glistening with tears, silently promised himself never to underestimate the invisible battles someone might be fighting behind a smile. As the emotional storm gradually settled, an investigation quietly uncovered the final piece of the mystery. The anonymous package had been orchestrated by an outside individual seeking revenge over a past professional conflict unrelated to the group itself. Unable to directly harm those responsible for an earlier failure, that person chose a far crueler method, targeting the strongest emotional bond instead. By isolating Jimin through carefully edited evidence and encouraging suspicion within the people closest to him, the architect of the deception believed the resulting heartbreak would accomplish what direct confrontation never could. The plan had almost succeeded. Not because the false evidence was flawless, but because silence had allowed fear to fill every empty space where honest conversation should have existed. Once the full truth emerged, the deception collapsed completely, and the person responsible faced the consequences of manipulating innocent lives for personal revenge. Yet even after justice was served, emotional wounds did not disappear overnight. Trust, once shaken, required patience, humility, and consistent care to rebuild. Jimin slowly allowed himself to accept the support he had always believed he needed to refuse. Jungkook learned that protecting someone also meant respecting their hidden struggles instead of demanding immediate answers. Their bond was no longer based on the illusion that they would never misunderstand one another. Instead, it became stronger because they understood that real loyalty meant choosing compassion before judgment, even when circumstances made the truth difficult to see. Taehyung's quiet reaction remained the moment everyone remembered most. While others searched desperately for someone to blame, he had carried the painful responsibility of balancing loyalty, promises, and compassion until revealing the truth became the only path left. His silent tears, shed not from weakness but from witnessing the cost of unconditional care, touched everyone who saw them. They reminded the group that genuine strength often appears in the quietest hearts. In the months that followed, laughter gradually returned, but it carried a deeper meaning than before. Every shared meal, every rehearsal, every ordinary moment became a quiet celebration of trust that had survived its greatest test. The scars never completely disappeared, yet they no longer represented pain alone. They became lasting reminders that love is measured not by the absence of hardship, but by the courage to remain beside one another after every misunderstanding has finally been overcome. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all: the people we treasure most are not asking us to believe that they are perfect. They are simply hoping that, when the world gives us every reason to doubt them, we will still have the courage to seek the truth before allowing our hearts to let them go. If this story moved you, let it serve as a reminder to value trust, choose empathy over assumptions, and never underestimate the healing power of honest understanding, because sometimes a single conversation can save a relationship that silence was slowly destroying. Long after the storm had passed, the memory of that unforgettable day remained etched into every heart that had witnessed it. The room where Jimin had finally allowed his tears to fall no longer represented heartbreak alone. It became a quiet symbol of the moment when hidden pain finally met genuine understanding. No one who stood there would ever forget how close they had come to losing something irreplaceable, not because love had disappeared, but because fear and silence had almost convinced them that trust no longer existed. From that day forward, every shared success carried a deeper appreciation, every difficult moment was met with greater honesty, and every smile held the quiet promise that no one would ever have to suffer alone again. Jimin gradually rediscovered the warmth he had sacrificed while protecting others, realizing that accepting support was not a sign of weakness but an act of courage. Jungkook transformed his regret into unwavering compassion, choosing to listen before assuming and to stand beside the people he loved even when the answers were unclear. RM continued guiding everyone with calm wisdom. Jin reminded the group that kindness could heal wounds words could not. Sugar proved that careful observation often reveals truths hidden beneath appearances. J-Hope never stopped bringing light into moments of darkness, and Taehyung quietly became the living reminder that true loyalty sometimes means carrying an impossible burden until the right moment arrives. Although life continued moving forward, none of them viewed ordinary days the same way again. They understood that the strongest relationships are not those that never break under pressure, but those willing to rebuild with honesty, forgiveness, and patience after everything seems lost. The scars left behind no longer symbolized failure. They became evidence that genuine trust can survive even the deepest misunderstandings when hearts refuse to give up on one another. And somewhere within those memories, the image of Jimin breaking down in front of Jungkook and Taehyung silently shedding tears remained forever unforgettable, not as a story of betrayal, but as a story of sacrifice, redemption, and the extraordinary power of choosing love over fear. Perhaps every one of us has faced moments when appearances seemed more convincing than the truth, when silence felt easier than honesty, or when pride stood between us and the people we cared about most. This story reminds us that assumptions can destroy in moments what trust takes years to build, while a single act of empathy can restore what once seemed impossible to repair. Before believing rumors, before allowing disappointment to replace understanding, and before walking away from someone who has always stood beside us, it is worth taking one more step toward the truth. Sometimes the answers we fear are not hidden behind betrayal at all, but behind sacrifices made out of love. Thank you for staying until the very end of this emotional journey. If this fictional story touched your heart, let us know in the comments which moment affected you the most and what lesson you will carry into your own life. Your thoughts, reflections, and interpretations make every story even more meaningful. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more cinematic emotional fiction inspired by the world of K-pop, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next unforgettable story. Until our next journey together, remember that trust grows through understanding, love grows through sacrifice, and the strongest hearts are often the ones that choose forgiveness when they have every reason not to.